Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. You can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 135 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how does depression impact a suicide? 3 questions answered. So in the last suicide-focused episode, I mentioned as an off-the-cuff comment that depression can actually impact a suicide and can actually make it more likely. And yes, that is true, but to some extent. But in today's episode, you'll actually get to learn tons of great, really interesting information about how depression can actually impact a suicide and how does it actually, because it's all well and good us just saying, oh yeah, depression impacts suicide. Depressed people are more likely to become suicidal. But that's not good enough. That is not enough information and that is not enough of an explanation behind this behavioural event, because if we just stuck at that definition and that amount of information, then we could not come up with effective solutions to this problem. Then in today's episode, we're actually going to dig down a bit more, and towards the end you'll actually hear my excitement of this really amazing, I don't know, a sort of technique to actually prevent suicide, and wow, I just think is absolutely brilliant. But more on that in the content part of today's episode. And it is Thursday the 24th of February 2022 as I record this. So, moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and there's some really good ones. So, the first one is, people who apologise a lot are seen as more warm and sincere. We all know that a chronic apologiser, maybe you are one, so it begins a fascinating new paper that explores how well we judge frequent versus rare apologisers and how this affects the way that how we react to their apologies. An abundance of work has shown that an apology for bad behaviour makes a big difference to the recipient. Open quote. Indeed, some scholars even imbued apologies with transformative and miraculous healing qualities. Close quote. Note Katerina Schuerman at the University of Pittsburgh and their colleagues in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. However, most researchers in this field have explored the impact of apologies in isolation. So this takes no account of a person's general tendency to apologise, but as we all know, some people apologise readily and frequently, whilst others don't. Okay, this one I really do agree with though, because we all know people from both extremes. So for example, I know people who've apologised tons, and I definitely wouldn't say I apologise tons, but sometimes it's just so much easier just to apologise even though you've done nothing wrong, so I sort of do that. But equally, sometimes I don't apologise if they're in the wrong, because of course you just don't apologise for stuff that you don't need to. Yeah, and as bad as that sounds, but you all know but I do slightly agree with the point about the so-called healing qualities though, because of course, if someone's done something wrong against you, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person necessarily, but if they don't apologise, then that can actually make them seem like a bad person, and that they're selfish, and to be honest, that you don't matter to them. So it really is important to actually apologise if you have done something wrong. So quite an interesting paper. And the second one is, when we're in a good mood, we're more likely to engage in healthy behaviours. On some days, waking up and engaging in healthy behaviour is easy. You will get up, hit the gym, drink enough water and spend time with friends. On others, even getting out of bed seems like too much effort. Knowing how to encourage healthy behaviours is therefore pretty useful, and much research has been done on what makes them stick, whether they're avoiding indulgent friends or paying to remove temptation. And a new study from a Kent State University team published in Motivation and Emotion finds that positive moods can also encourage healthy behaviours, at least in the short term. Yes, there's not too much to say about this. This is something that I actually find quite funny about human behaviour, because this is sort of a I forget what the actual word is though, but let's go with dichotomy, because the problem is that when you're in a bad mood, you can actually like use exercising to actually make you like feel better. But when you're in a bad mood, you don't want to do that. So you don't want to do the stuff that could make you feel better. Whereas when you're in a like positive mood, okay, you're more likely to exercise, which makes you feel good, which is good in the sense that it prolongs your happiness. But it's bad in the sense that when you're that you don't want to do the stuff that makes you feel better. So it's just one of those weird kinks of like human behaviour. And the final one is interesting. People think they're less likely to get COVID from friends than from strangers, and that like before I actually like read out the article, I'm actually being amazed that so many people actually like think but like I think this because I've been having to tell tons of people why mass social distancing actually works and why people should actually do it. So let's dive into what the article says. Social distancing has been a key part of the pandemic response. We all know that our chance of infection is reduced if we minimise the contacts we have with each other. Yet, there are countless stories of people covertly meeting up with friends and family, even at the height of a lockdown. And if you're in the UK, you know why I'm laughing. Many of those who disregarded the rules did so because of a desire for social interaction and support. But a study in humanities and social sciences communication suggested that there might be another reason too. Well, we simply underestimate the risk of contracting COVID-19 from friends. And to be honest, as I mentioned earlier, tons of people I know have actually done that. And there's a study in my biological psychology book, which I cannot remember now, but I think it's something like Rabbi and someone like 2006. But it was an evolutionary psychology study, which at the end of it got people got people to list who they would rather share a toothbrush with, and there were husbands and husbands and wives all the way up to the postman. And of course, no surprise that people preferred to share their wife or their husband's toothbrush simply because as that disgusting or as filled with germs, which of course, when you look at it logically, is absolutely nonsense. But it just it goes to show though that people we trust, we tend to think that we're less likely to get bad health outcomes or something like that. It's all very, very interesting. So I hope that you enjoy the psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So in terms of placement stuff for this week, there's nothing great to report because I've just been continuing with the same stuff as last week. But I've got very, very exciting personal news. At least this is exciting to me. But on Monday I finally passed my driving test, and yes, I will keep this very, very brief. I'm so pleased that I finally passed it because I'm pretty sure that if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, then you would remember around September 2020, and I actually had a few comments about driving and all of that stuff. And to be honest, I have hated driving lessons simply because I've been doing it in terms of calendar years, 3 years, 5 months. But of course, it's been nowhere near that because of lockdowns and just cancelled lessons. But I've kept doing it, and on my fourth driving test, I finally passed though. So I'm really, really pleased with those. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is just quite simply, if you're struggling to pass your driving test, just keep trying. It can happen. I am basically living proof of that. Okay then. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment our show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Abnormal Psychology, the causes and treatments of depression, anxiety, and more, third edition. So, but this is an absolutely brilliant book to actually sponsor today's episode because this book goes into so much fascinating depth about depression For example, it's a biological, social and a cognitive causes, and then it also goes into the wide range of the treatment options. So this is a great, really interesting book that was like, if you want to learn about depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and so much more about like mental health conditions, then you've got to check out this great book. So that's Abnormal Psychology, the Causes and Treatments of Depression, Anxiety and More, 3rd edition. Available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, and local library if you request it. But if you do want to buy a book, but you still want to give the podcast a bit like one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So let's move into the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how does depression impact suicide. And the way how I'm actually going to talk about this is by answering 3 questions that were, because as I was writing this, I realised that this was actually going to be the easiest way to actually get it across, and this is also the easiest way to actually overcome some of the myths and the misconceptions. How does depression lead to suicidal thinking? Lots of different people experience suicidal thinking in their lives, and this usually happens a lot after a difficult life event, like the loss of a loved one, job, or something else that is important to them, as we've spoken about on previous episodes. In addition, depression links to this type of thinking because it impairs our cognitive flexibility, as it changes our patterns of feeling and thinking, so we cannot see a way out of our current situation, as well as we cannot imagine or even entertain the idea of a better future. Also, the cognitive triad in depression leads a person to focus on all of their setbacks or their so-called mistakes and what makes them a failure, including relationship failures and adverse childhood experiences. Therefore, this only adds to their feelings of worthlessness, and depression only magnifies the pain that they're suffering, all will lead to a depressed person being more likely to seek out suicide as the only viable escape route from all of this suffering and psychological pain. So personally, this is rather tragic to write and actually talk about, but it is important because it is important for all of us to understand the importance of treatment and the work that we do as psychology professionals and in the future psychology students, because it is the work that we do that can save lives, or at the very least help people decrease and cope with their psychological distress. And this is why psychology is critical. How common is suicide in depression? According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, it turns out 2% of the people who are treated for depression in an outpatient service take their own life, as well as for all those people who were ever hospitalized for depression, the death rate by suicide is 4%. And before I actually dive into the numbers a bit more, I actually want to mention that this does sort of fly in the face of a massive misconception about suicide, since I have heard plenty of the times through the grapevine, so to speak, that people believe that all depressed people commit a suicide. Thankfully, that is far, far, far from the case, but still 4% is way too high for my liking, and it should be 0% in an ideal world, and thankfully that is where psychologists can come in. Additionally, around 60% of suicide victims have a mood condition that is potentially treatable, and younger people who kill themselves often have a substance abuse difficulty as well. Of course, in addition to the other life factors that can impact the suicide. And this is the main reason why I talk about these things in my books, in person, and on the podcast. Because even if I can educate or prompt one person to convince others to get professional help if they have a mental health condition, then that means I could have potentially saved a life. This is why psychologists and therapists are critical, because without us, so many people would still be suffering. As well as this is what I hate with a passion all with the rubbish that psychology gets, with people were thinking that we know nothing. Psychology is a profiling and therapists are dangerous. And in that sense, I'm actually talking about when we're perceived as villains in books and the programs, because I sort of feel it's becoming a bit cliche, so to speak, because this bad representation isn't helpful to us, our clients, and to the people who will need professional aid but don't trust us. Anyway, jumping off my soapbox, which it sort of is. Do anti-suicide pacts work? Now, this is what I was really, really impressed with. I think this is absolutely amazing and absolutely brilliant. Okay then, so this is actually rather cool and really, really clever. So, these pacts have been around for ages because average patients and their therapists as a way to stop the patient from committing a suicide. These are pacts or contracts that can be written or verbal, but that isn't important. What is important is that it gets the average patient to not self-harm or commit suicide, as well as the pacts make the patient call the therapist, an emergency number, or 999 if they even think about suicide for a moment. Furthermore, effective suicide contracts, which are written, dated, and signed, with a copy given to each person and are kept in an accessible location, not only ensure the patient doesn't kill themselves, but it ensures that they call emergency numbers when they're in danger. Again, what is so brilliant about these pacts is that they're not legally binding, as that increases comfort for the patient, as well as the therapist cannot and does not need to file it in a court and to get the patient arrested, because of course suicide is a crime. Also, where this is all very, very commonplace in certain industries where the suicide rates are extremely high, like in paramedics and other first responders, with them becoming more and more common amongst friends and family members of anyone who has been suicidal. And this is what I love about this podcast, because I think this pack idea is just amazing, because it's such an effective and it's so easy to do that I'm extremely pleased that people actually have this as an option. Conclusion. So after today's episode, I'm actually rather hopeful about the future, because if this episode has actually taught me anything, it is how important psychology students for the future and psychology professionals are, because we are a massive line of defence for depressed people. Also, I guess that the real point of today's episode was to teach all of us how valuable we are for depressed people and why our work matters so much to so many. And I have to admit, I love those anti-suicide pacts. I think that they're just such a great idea. Of course, nothing on the podcast is ever official advice, but still, they're pretty great. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that you got something out of it. If you know someone who will enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out A Normal Psychology, the causes and treatments of depression, anxiety and more, third edition, available in all the usual places. So have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.